You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lorditis. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to another episode of the Counterflow podcast. Great to have you with me here this week. Thank you guys for the ton of feedback last week after that episode with Jay Dyer. I have to say, I think it was probably the most amount of feedback that I've ever received from any episode. And that was probably within the first handful of days after it was released. So thank you guys. And it was just about all positive. So you guys enjoyed Jay Dyer. I enjoyed Jay Dyer. So I'm glad you guys liked that. And welcome to all of the new listeners and viewers that have come aboard due to that episode. Thank you guys for joining us here in the Counterflow family, we can say. I think you'll enjoy this episode as well. My friend Matt Erickson is back here. But first, I always mention this at the end of every episode, but I think I'll just give it a shot here at the beginning too. If you find value in this show that I drop every week for free, and you'd like to donate anything at all, even $1 or really as much as you'd like, you can do so over at patreon.com/counterflow. And every penny I make over there goes right back into the show. You've got my word on that. So on to this week's show with my friend Matt Erickson. Like I said, he's back with us here. And speaking of feedback, I always get a ton of feedback after my episodes with Matt as well. I think I've told this story on here once before, but after the first time I had Matt on, let's just say a very well-known voice in our circles called me specifically to say, that was a hell of a show. That guy Matt was saying things I really have been thinking about and wanting to say, but yet here he is and he said them. So we're going to hit some more of those things that some of you have been saying or would like to say, I bet you, on this episode too. And he's officially in my state now. It's going to be a story of political, spiritual, mental worldview evolution on this episode. He's always looking to evolve, and so he's a good person to have on to talk about that. Like I said, he's officially a Texan. Why on earth would someone want to move to Texas from California? I asked that jokingly, of course, but just a couple of years ago, we'll include all of these things here. Let's say a couple of years ago, he was in California. He was not a parent. He was working for Jason Stapleton on the Jason Stapleton Show. He was a hardcore libertarian. And now, I would say none of those things are true. Everything I have just listed about Matt has changed in the past few years. So it's going to be an interesting discussion on why that is. And I know that's happened to a lot of you over the last several years. It's probably impossible for many of us to look at the world the same way that you did, let's just say in 2018, spiritually, culturally, politically, just your overall worldview, I suspect for a lot of you has changed drastically over the last several years. And so I think you'll be able to relate a lot to this episode. Matt Erickson is the head honcho. Is it safe to call him that, Stephen? Stephen's his partner over there at the Kingpilled podcast. And many of you are fans. I know that. If you're not, go search for the Kingpilled podcast to get more of Matthew's thoughts. But for now, he's back with us here on Counterflow. My friend, and now fellow Texan. For the first time as a Texan, welcome to the show, Matt Erickson. How are you?
I am tired, but I'm here, and it's good to talk to you. I haven't sat in the interview chair like this in a little while, so I'm looking forward to this.
I know. Now the days we're usually standing next to each other.
That's right.
Well, we can talk about all kinds of things. I guess first, for those who don't know, you are in Texas, and we'll get to that. But what happened with the regularly scheduled Kingpilled episodes? We're missing these.
They are, yeah. And I've been missing doing it. The last couple of months have been very, very chaotic. Very chaotic. We relocated to Texas as you alluded to, from Southern California. And that was a kind of a last minute decision. We weren't exactly planning on doing that when we did it. We were planning eventually. We drove out here in October for the Thaddeus Russell event, and at your place. And we decided that we liked Texas. Like, we liked it well enough to be like, yeah, we want to move there. We moved here obviously for cultural reasons. And we moved to the San Antonio area, which I have to say is starting to grow on me a little bit, but it's definitely, in terms of like geography and everything, it's definitely like probably my least favorite place I've ever lived. But I'm
sorry,
here for
Carlos.
a reason. What's
yes,
that?
Yes, I said sorry, Carlos.
Yeah, sorry, Carlos. Yeah, but I'm here. I'm here. We're here for a reason. So that reason trumps those sorts of concerns. The biggest thing was just that we have a now, as of today, 18-month-old son, and he reminds me a lot of me in a lot of ways when I was younger, as our sons often do. And I know that it's just a matter of time, knock on wood, before he winds up in the hospital for one reason or another. And we want to be able to exercise full control over our son's medical decisions. I'll just say that. Mm-hmm. And so being in Southern California was just something that no longer really became an option to us. So we started making plans middle of last year to start, okay, we need to start thinking about moving to Texas. And we had a list of places. We were looking at Idaho, Texas, Utah, a few different states. And we settled on Texas because we had the largest social network here. We have a pretty good number of friends here, including yourself and your lovely wife. And the friends that we have here are really good quality friends. They're the types of people that you want to have around you in times of crisis and instability. So that was what ultimately sold us on Texas. And we just drove out here in October, checked it out, liked it, good to go. We planned on moving here maybe later this year or early next year, something like that. And we were going to take some time to save up so that we could make the move without having to dip into savings, that kind of thing. And then our some stuff came up, and it became clear that it was time to part ways with Jason Stapleton, who we were working with, and he had some different ideas about stuff he wanted to do. He wanted to take things in a different direction, and we were just with him on a contract basis. So it just no longer made sense for us to sustain the same contract. So this was just right just at the end of last year, and so we found ourselves suddenly, without a pretty significant chunk of our income. And we've been very blessed that for the last 3 or 4 years, something like that, we've worked almost exclusively from home and made pretty good money while we were doing it. And so we were weighing all of these things and deciding whether or not we wanted to remain in California. We were like, well, we were already planning on moving eventually anyways. And we've got the best real income offer that we got was here in Texas. And it happened to be the first person that my wife talked to let him know that things were changing and we were weighing our options. He was the first person to make us a really good offer. So it just we prayed about it really, really sincerely for most of the month of December. And we gave ourselves Christmas as a deadline to decide. And the hardest thing for us, honestly, was leaving our church, because we started attending a fantastic Orthodox church in Riverside, California. Speaking of Riverside, so the streaming software that we're using.
Yeah, yes.
And we loved our priest there. We still love our priest there, Father Josiah Trinum. You might be familiar with him if you've looked up Orthodox stuff on YouTube. One of the when I am in his presence, I know what it's like to be in the presence of a holy man. That's the way I can describe him. And so we really wanted to. It was very difficult leaving there, but he gave us his blessing. He said there was a lot of great churches here in Texas, and gave us his blessing as we headed here. So we moved here and expected to get into a house or something right away. And I'll just shorten the story up and say we're staying in an Airbnb. We've been in an Airbnb for since January. And we're just kind of taking it month by month. And I've spent the last couple of months doing a crash course on real estate, learning doing all my real estate classes, getting licensed, taking the test, studying for the test, taking the test, then doing onboarding with a brokerage that I'm working with here now fantastic brokerage, very, very good. The Levi Rogers Group. I'll just say that if you want to look it up, he's got a really interesting story. He was in the Army. I think he was I think he might have been a Ranger. I don't remember. He was in the Army, got blown up, broke basically every bone in his body, came back, was really down and out for a while, ended up starting this brokerage, and it's wildly successful and growing. And it's full of just genuinely really, really good people. And so being connected to that was a really good opportunity for us. Real estate is something that I've been wanting to get into for a while now as a protection against the economic situation, and among other things. So it's kind of like we're staying in an Airbnb, but it's almost like kind of like living out of a hotel. Kind of the feeling of it, because we don't have all of our stuff. It's not the optimal layout, all that kind of thing. And then like I'm just here kind of crammed into a corner of a bedroom, got just a plain white wall. I miss all my colorful lights and everything. So keeping up with the show has just been, it just kind of had to get pushed to the side, which has been kind of a bummer, because I've noticed that there's been a direct correlation between me falling away from doing the show regularly and me starting to get really kind of like moody and depressed. And it's kind of like all the ideas and words and stuff that are used to coming out are all backlogged now. And it's like carrying them around with me all the time. And so I feel like shit. But yeah, we're very happy to be in Texas. We're and really what's turned into one of the biggest bright sides of this whole experience is that we just so happened to get connected to another really, really good church. Interestingly, also called exactly, also called St. Andrews. So obviously the church that you and your wife go to, and we've been very happy. We're looking forward to seeing you there tomorrow.
Indeed. Yes, as we record this tomorrow.
Right.
Well, let's get into a few things. You talked about that you worked for Jason Stapleton. I think a lot of people know that. You and I belong to loosely what some people term the post-libertarian camp. And, we don't have to talk about the term, what it really means, how it should or should not be used. If anyone's really curious about that, I would direct you to postlibertarianmoment.com. There you go, LB. We don't have to talk specifically about that term, but what it would presuppose, I guess, is that at some point you considered and called yourself a libertarian. And so let's get to that point of your life where you were then. I'm guessing it's around 2015 or so. And I know you and your wife met in the Jason Stapleton Facebook group, which I know there's people listening to this show right now that were a part of that group, because it's funny, you think about those times and it seems so much more innocent. Like, oh, the old Jason Stapleton Facebook group, we're arguing over ridiculously autistic things at that time, of course. So let's go back to then. What were your politics like about 2015 or so?
That's an interesting thought. I was kind of at a transition point right at that time. For the last 2014, 2015, I'd been really kind of starting to get into libertarian politics. I'd started listening to Tom Woods. I'd started listening to Jason. And I came from growing up very conservative, Christian, very rah-rah about George Bush kind of. And then in college, I'd been very interested in student loan forgiveness. And so I'd been very intrigued by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren talking about free college. And that was what had got me into studying economics, which led me kind of back into libertarianism. I'd been exposed to him through Ron Paul, through my dad in the mid-2000s. Actually, 2008 was the first year I ever voted, and I wrote in Ron Paul. So I was going down the libertarian rabbit hole right in the 2014, 2015 time. I had a couple of jobs that involved really long commutes. So I was listening to audiobooks and podcasts like crazy. So I listened to all the Murray Rothbard, all the Mises, all the, like I said, Tom Woods, Bastiat. I listened to like all the classics, economics in one lesson, just plowing through them. It was all I did whenever I wasn't at work. I was just focused on that. And so then I got pretty active in the Facebook group there, and on Facebook in general. I was just kind of posting. I was in lots of different groups, arguing with people about stuff all the time, and kind of honing my chops and encountering new ideas and figuring out how to overcome them, and then being recommended new things to go read or listen to. And I kind of did the typical standard progression from libertarian leaning to libertarian to actually specifically, I'm a minarchist to full ANCAP. And that was around the time that I around the time we moved to Southern California and I started co-hosting Wealth, Power, and Influence, or at the time, the Jason Stapleton program. And once again, now the Jason Stapleton program. At that time, I was as hardcore of an ANCAP as I know. There was my goal was that I was going to attach myself as rigidly and precisely to the purest Rothbardian anarcho-capitalism that I could. And yeah, that was kind of the point of view that I had heading into the immediate pre-COVID era. And I've always had kind of a right-wing bent coming from my background. But I'm also, if you take the what's it called, the Big Five personality assessment that Jordan Peterson offers, I think it's understandmyself.com. You can take, it's like $10. Pretty interesting test. And I'm like 98th percentile in openness. So I'm incredibly open, which is typically not a conservative trait. Conservatives tend to be very low in openness. So I'm definitely have a very conservative background. I have a very right-wing view of the world, but I'm also very, very high in openness. So it's it makes me, like, the plus side of it would be I'm very, very open-minded and curious, and it's easy to change my mind about the evidence when the evidence changes in front of me. I'm not attached to the old ideas. The potential risk for me is that it can make me an entirely pragmatic person. It's pure pragmatism. I can have no consideration for morality or ethics or principles at all, because those are those are like standards that I don't want to abide to because I want to pursue my openness. Mm-hmm. So those are kind of the two sides of the psychology that are sort of warring back and forth within me, and that has kind of driven the evolution of my thinking. I've seen it as one kind of nonstop, like a drilling down deeper and deeper and deeper, and trying to distill things, trying to get to the absolute essence. And when I got to the point where I realized I'm not an ANCAP anymore, and got to the point where even now, like now, I don't even want to associate myself with the label of libertarian.
You're right.
Like I don't want to be seen that way at all. I don't mind if people know that I used to be a libertarian, but I want people to know now that I'm not. And it doesn't feel to me like I U-turned anywhere. It doesn't feel to me like I veered off course. I continued on the exact same trajectory and just kept sloughing off more and more, like dead wood. The dead wood's getting sloughed off and making it purer and purer. And at one point, I thought that I'd sloughed off all the dead wood and I was an ANCAP. But then I realized I had more dead wood to slough off, and I did that. And now I'm a Christian. And as a Christian, that's not just my religion. It's my worldview. It's my epistemology. It's the very foundation of everything that I see and know about the world. So yeah, we often get accused of being whatever retarded, like statist or some goofy thing like that, or you guys, we're apostates really in the eyes of people who haven't progressed in their own thinking. We're people who used to agree with them and now we don't, so we're seen as apostates. So they're going to go after us most aggressively. We get more hate than outright communists, which is really because libertarians and communists aren't actually that far apart. But there you go, little dig under the belt.
Were you a party guy? And I don't mean your wild days. I mean politically.
Yes.
Yeah. As you now sip on raw milk. Were you a political party guy? I know you had, I guess we're allowed to say it, I know you had connections in starting up and helping the startup of the Mises Caucus within the LP. But before that actual kind of coalition, were you a party guy at all? Were you going to meetings and that kind of thing?
I never did. I wanted to. It was really more just either not having money or it just not syncing up with my schedule, kind of.
You had
I was definitely... Yeah, basically. it was something that I was interested in for sure at one point. I watched the presidential debates in the lead up to 2020. I was definitely very not 2020, but 2016.
2016, yeah.
Yeah. I was definitely very interested in the party for a while, and when the Mises Caucus thing popped up, I was like the core constituency for the Mises Caucus. Like when they started the Mises Caucus, I was like the heart of the type of person who they were looking for. So I was the person who wasn't really super invested in the party, but was definitely willing to be if it meant having a true Rothbardian takeover. That was very appealing to me. That's why I wound up being invited to participate in the formation of the caucus very early on. And I always, whenever I kind of allude to this in public, I'm not interested in having like a unit measuring contest with anybody. I'm careful to say that I pieced out very early on. And I probably could have been better about the way I probably could have. I could have done it better. I could have been more respectful or I could have done it in a better way. I just kind of dipped out without saying anything because I got really disillusioned with it and started feeling like I was the thought that led me down that pathway was I was thinking, okay, so now as I'm going to be involved in this, what does this mean? This means getting involved in all this, the bureaucracy, and then I'm going to be like going door to door and knocking on people's doors and trying to talk them into being libertarian. And I was like, the thought that really hung me up for a long time was, what if I encounter someone who's not involved in politics, who's not a political person? How would I appeal to them? Because I know how to make arguments against the Democrat or the Republican or whatever, but like someone who just isn't politically active, isn't very interested, like how would I talk them into being interested in the political party? And I was like, why would I do that? Like the whole point is to get more people to be like that person, to not be invested in the political system, to check out of it and not give it the time of day. So now why am I doing something that necessarily requires me to start trying to pull people into politics? Get people into political activism. That just didn't. I was like, this just doesn't square. Like, why would this be why would this be the praxis, to use the term?
Yeah.
And that was really the start of kind of everything unraveling for me. And it was right at the same time, sort of, that I started doing the show with Jason and started talking a lot more about people's personal development and how to develop like the types of skills that are going to make you very valuable to a community, which will ensure your stability and support within that community, which is a fantastic form of security. All of those things were like, I was like, this is where people need to put their time and effort. Spending energy on this other stuff is just, it's not going to pay off. And then I wound up with the Machiavellians and went just, I was a lost cause very quickly. But yeah, so that was kind of the progression for me there.
Were you one of those people that said that you were neither left nor right? I know it sounds funny now, but what was the thing that Gary Johnson would say? We are socially I can't remember even how he would say this. We're
socially liberal and fiscally conservative.
Yeah. And it's funny because there's people that within the LP that make fun of that then say, but we're neither left nor right. Like, well, you're saying the same. You're just saying a different version of it, but okay. So you did kind of use that.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not dogging you. I did the same thing for many years.
Yeah,
okay.
Totally. I remember sharing the meme that was made that listed like all of the bad stuff that the Democrats do and all the good stuff that Democrats do and all the good stuff that Republicans do and all the bad stuff that Republicans do. And it said the libertarians were all the good stuff of both of them and they without the bad stuff. I shared that like in full sincerity. Yeah. And I just look back on it now and I'm like, oh my God. What terrifies me is, so that was 2022. That was 6-7 years ago, something like that. Mm-hmm. So in 2028, am I going to be looking back on 2022 me going, oh my God, how could I be such a noob? That thought haunts me.
That's interesting. That's going to haunt me too about myself. I suspect the answer is yes for me. You know, I did an interview on this show with our spiritual father now, Father Ignatius, and I started it by, I had to preface everything with this. I understand that I am so green in this topic that I'm going to listen to this interview maybe in like 1 month or 2 months from now and go, why did I say it that way? So I can only imagine in 2028 what I'm going to look back and think. One of my favorite sponsors is back with us here on Counterflow. That would be Texas Scorecard. Anytime you want to find out anything that's going on in the Texas political scene without a bad propagandized media narrative, just visit Texas Scorecard. They were founded in 2015 by a former Ron Paul congressional press secretary. They're Texas-based, they're Texas-focused counterculture media organization. They've got so many cool things over at Texas Scorecard. Lots of podcasts, videos. Actually, I was a part of that. You can find a video there of me being interviewed in the Texas Scorecard studio. They've got live programming. They've got a print edition. They've got a very popular daily email newsletter highlighting the biggest stories of the day. They've even got a program to help grow the next generation of disruptors, and we like that. Their mission, disrupt statism and reconstitute self-governments. They are pro-citizen. They serve the grassroots against big government through narrative tools and information. They do not align with any party. I think that's very important. They work to hold lawmakers on both sides of the aisle accountable. They're a nonprofit. There's no paywalls. You guys aren't going to have to pay for any of this. The reporting is always free. Find them on all social media channels by searching Texas Scorecard. They're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all of that. You can sign up for their free daily newsletter at texasminute.com. That is texasminute.com. Think about this. They support this program for you guys. So just give them a look. Texas Scorecard. Anytime you want to find out the real deal of what's going on in the Texas political scene, Texas Scorecard is your one-stop shop. Let's get back to the show. Did the Trump presidency do some things to change your opinions on politics and the kind of cultural landscape?
Majorly. It changed so much. And really it kind of got to the point where I can't take you seriously if it didn't change the way that you see things.
Yeah.
Between that and then COVID would really be just like, it's not that I can't take you seriously, it's that I don't want to associate you with COVID if COVID didn't change your perspective on things.
Yeah.
The Trump thing was just watching the way that previously reasonable people in my life became just completely deranged and they would post screeds online that just sounded like someone having a mental breakdown.
Yeah.
And it was so much of the whole shtick with him and with CNN and the going back and forth. So much of it was so obviously scripted. It was the term that I really like that Eric Weinstein introduced me to is kayfabe.
Well, you were talking to a wrestling fan, of course.
Yeah, that's right.
And for my people listening, I wanted to interview Matt so badly that right as we speak, this very second WrestleMania Saturday night is going on, and I've paused it to do this interview.
I feel very honored. I know the magnitude of that decision.
I'm familiar with kayfabe, and you're right. I heard Weinstein use it, maybe on Rogan or something like that, and I kind of got excited. Weinstein's a not particularly exciting person to listen to, but he started saying kayfabe, and I'm like, oh my God, maybe he's halfway cool.
Nope, just a nerd.
Yeah. Sorry to derail it quickly with my wrestling geek, offshoot there. That was from Mark Claire, but yeah, back to where we were. Sorry.
Yeah. That was watching how very obviously scripted so much of it was and realizing that other people couldn't tell that it was scripted in the same way. Other people were taking a lot of it very seriously. And I think probably what really alarmed me the most about it was seeing the degree to which, like, I was always aware of the fact that there's a degree of programming within the media, that it's obviously not neutral. It's obviously designed to persuade you, and they're obviously marketing something to you. I was never really kind of not aware of that. I just assumed that, they meant well and the truth was approximately directionally where they were looking. And what I'd never really grappled with was the fact that the stuff, the way that they lie is in the stuff they don't talk about. So it's the negative space. That's where you learn that how much you're being lied to. It's not that you're being lied to and that they're necessarily deliberately telling you untrue things. That definitely happens as well. But the most significant lies that they tell, I think, are lies of omission.
Yes.
And that's the kind of, once you start studying history and you if you have an open enough mind, you're willing to venture outside the shout out Tom Woods, the 3x5 card of allowable opinion. You start recognizing that and you start realizing, okay, well, if all of this stuff was outside the mainstream perspective back then, well, what things are outside there's obviously got to be things now that are happening that we don't know about that are that would be explicitly denied, just like there were back then. And you can follow some of those trains through to today. I was studying the beginnings of the development of the national security state and the creation of the CIA, all those kinds of things. If you study that history, even just relatively mainstream stuff, read Stephen Kinzer's books. They're not super wackadoodle conspiracy fringe stuff. And you can very obviously start kind of tracing some of these threads through to today and realize, okay, you can understand there's a whole world that's not being talked about that's going on all around us all the time. So seeing the way that people were just such a massive swaths of the population were completely unaware of that. And were just taking everything that they saw totally at face value and realizing and seeing the way that they would react to something that challenged their worldview, like the instant, like knee-jerk meltdown freak out. Like, no. Nothing outside of my perspective can enter my frame. Get it out, remove it however possible. Seeing that response and realizing how many people are just programmed. They're just walking around with something that's been intentionally, deliberately programmed into them to induce them to take certain actions and say certain things and believe certain things. And all they do is just parrot it. They just parrot it back. They can be incredibly self-aware people, and they're just sitting here just parroting stuff because they don't recognize the degree to which the entire edifice of their belief system has been built on explicit propaganda.
Yeah.
And realizing that, kind of being exposed to that, it was really blackpilling for a while. Because it's like, how are we possibly going to overcome this momentum? There's so much momentum like accelerating downhill. How are we going to not only stop the thing, but somehow turn it around and start pushing it back uphill again? Like, those are two separate processes. And both of them seem completely outside of, it's like there's no way that in the amount of time before everything crashes and burns that we're going to be able to muster the resources and energy necessary to take control of this whole thing and turn the ship around. And that was when I started being like, well, maybe we don't need to. What if we don't need to turn the whole ship around? What if we could just let the ship crash itself and kind of like let it do its own thing and just ensure that we're not caught in the wreckage? Like, is that a viable option? That was kind of, I think, the thinking that led me into the Machiavellians and Moldbug, and from there, it was that process moved quickly. The entire way that I saw the world was undone in the matter of, I mean, it'd been 30 years in the making, and it was undone in the space of 18 months, basically.
And did I assume, because I already know the answer, but to present this in a linear way here, then 2020 obviously kicked things into even a higher gear. What did that do to your thoughts on culture, politics, society, people?
Interestingly enough, I was very early in the sounding the alarm about COVID being a big deal. It's kind of weird to think about now, but between the end of January and beginning of March of 2020, the standard narrative was that COVID was no big deal, that it was just anti-China fear-mongering by a bunch of racists, suggesting that it was like people were equating it to like Chinese, saying that like Chinese people are, I don't know how picky YouTube censors are going to be, that they're like DIRTY. You know, it was like that was what was being associated. And I was listening to some fringe corners on Twitter that were like looking at this, and they were like, no, this looks bad. This looks really, really bad. The numbers that are coming out are, you know, who perhaps they're doctored, but with a threat like this, you don't have the luxury of sitting around and saying, it's just doctored. Because if you do that, then you put yourself behind the 8 ball so fast, assuming the premises of normal virology and the spread of viruses and infectivity and all that kind of thing. So I'd done a big crash course on understanding the traditional story of virology and all that sort of thing. And the biggest concern, what I recognized is whether or not the virus is as deadly as it seems, even if it's not as deadly, it's still going to have a dramatic economic impact. And because of that, the state is going to step in. The question isn't whether they should or shouldn't, they are. And it's going to cause major issues. It's going to cause major economic issues. So much of this house of cards is just barely teetering there, and it's going to get knocked to high heaven. And so for a long time, for the first probably month and a half, maybe, so from the beginning of February till the end of March of 2020, I was genuinely concerned that the virus was actually going to be as bad as it looked. And that the most dangerous thing about it, to my perception at the time, was that you can get infected and it can last for a long time before you start showing symptoms. You can be carrying the infection, but last for a long time without showing symptoms. And then it can be a sickness that will last for so long that you wind up being a huge drain on the medical system. That idea made a lot of sense to me. And I was like, this is going to cause, whether or not the virus is serious, this is going to cause major economic hiccups. And so I was sounding that alarm. And then as time went on, it became very clear, okay, the virus isn't as bad as it was made out to be. That probably was maybe a sentence I shouldn't have said. But like there was videos of people collapsing and dying in the streets in China. And it became very clear, okay, this is entirely made up. Everything happening in northern Italy was not all that it was cracked up to be. That didn't carry over to here. At the same time, I was listening to people who I'm willing to listen to anybody who can make a coherent case for something. I don't care what your credentials are. I don't care what, if you can make it internally coherent and you can present evidence that squares with it, I'll take that on board and run with it until someone proves otherwise. And I've learned some very interesting stuff about the school of virology and how politicized it's been, and how much of the so-called science with it is there's lots of different perspectives out there. And I won't go any further than that, because that's the type of stuff that definitely gets you manhunted. But that was a really big red pill for me, realizing the extent to which the entire medical system has been just completely compromised, not just on the pharmaceutical side, but even on the scientific research side. I had no idea just how corrupted and bought off the whole thing was. And so then I think what Trump did was Trump really black-pilled me, just to use the terminology, black-pilled me on the utility of the public as a political vehicle. Just that they're just completely given over to these propagandists. There's nothing you're ever going to do to wrangle up enough of them to make a difference. That was probably so I guess maybe it was that Trump basically is what convinced me that everyone was a bunch of sheep. And then COVID was the thing that convinced me that all the institutions were completely bought off and corrupted. And once I had those two things on board, then it was just like, okay, I need to remake my entire worldview. I need to completely change the way that I'm approaching the world, because I'm not living in the world that I thought I was. And that's a sobering thought. That's a kind of a difficult thought to take on board and to run with. And I think that's probably why a lot of people don't want to do it. A lot of people would rather just kind of throw the blinders on and pretend, no, none of that stuff's the case. I'm going to keep running with the world as if it is still the way it was before I was presented with this new information. So that was that was kind of where I was left after COVID. And another big thing that happened with it as well was that when I was going through the stretch of several weeks there where it looked like the virus itself might actually be genuinely like Ebola, maybe not quite Ebola, but like, that level of deadly. I was thinking, okay, so if this is actually this bad, if it's actually bad enough that the best solution for people is lock yourselves down. Like imagine if there actually was a pathogen that was going around.
Yeah.
And the best thing that you could do is everyone separate yourselves. Just like the whole community cooperate, work together. We're all going to separate ourselves. We're going to make sure that we're going to test ourselves for symptoms. Like that kind of thing was plausible to me. As like, this is something that hypothetically, there could be some really bad bug that somehow gets out and does all that. I was like, a libertarian society, or at least a society made up of the people who are libertarians would be absolutely decimated by something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They would have no capability of dealing with it. There isn't a ground up decentralized method of managing that type of a threat. It just doesn't exist. The only way that a human population is actually going to really effectively manage a hypothetical situation like that is with a top-down authoritarian, like, we're locking you down for your own good, whether you like it or not. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that the current system is good. It's the exact opposite. But that was what really persuaded me that authoritarianism isn't a bad thing. That it's very good to have very rigid, clearly defined authority, and to have the people who are in power be unquestionably in power and have everybody know that they're in power. Give them the responsibility of being in power. Don't make them have to try to pretend that they're not in power, because that's how you get corruption. So those were the kind of the thoughts that really were, if my worldview had been, I guess, kind of dismantled to the ground, that was what was kind of starting to build it back up again.
And part of the problem with what you're saying that people won't realize is it's okay to believe that there can be, should be, and will be an elite. It's that we're so used to the people that are presented and pushed as our elite are very low quality elite. And so we're used to saying, well, if you hear someone like say what you just said, well, oh my God, this guy wants someone like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to have all the power. No, that's not. But to an untrained ear, that is what some might think when they hear you say these things. It's Hans Hermann Hoppe has said this, and so has Jeff Deist. It's not that we're against an elite. It's that the elite that we have now are super low qualified to be that, and yes, they're propped up there through a system that doesn't work for us because of all kinds of shadowy groups that we can talk about.
And the reason why the system doesn't work for us is because it has been built to satisfy the assumptions that people exercising power over other people is wrong and immoral.
Mm-hmm.
So the entire system has been built so that everyone who is exercising power over other people can plausibly say that they aren't. That's the fundamental assumption that undergirds the American regime, which is the Western regime at large.
Mm-hmm.
It's built with the idea of the radical sovereignty of the individual and like total skepticism of authority and power. And paradoxically, that's what's created one of the most untrammeled, powerful authorities of all time.
Yes.
So doing more of the stuff that gave us this isn't going to solve that problem. That's why you're going to have an elite who has power and authority. What you want a high quality elite that everybody knows has the power and authority that they do. What we have is a low quality elite where nobody is held accountable for the power that they actually hold. And that's because our system was built by libertarians, essentially, because it's built with the libertarian metaphysical assumptions. That's why we have the system that we do. We have the system that we do because of the ideas that are central to libertarianism.
If you're looking for the world's best CBD products, look no further than PalomaVerdeCBD.com, a like-minded business out of San Antonio, Texas, owned by a great couple, Carlos and Vanessa. They love the show. They're supporting the show. They're giving you a discount when you buy these products because you like this show. We'll get there at the end here, but I've been ranting and raving about the sports cream for a long time. It is the best. I genuinely mean that. So if you're sore from workouts, go check out the CBD Menthol Sports Cream. If you're having trouble sleeping, they've got the Sleep Bundle CBD Pack. Maybe you've got pets like I do, like my 2 French bulldogs, Lux and George, that experience inflammation in some part of their spine or their back legs or whatever. Well, look no further. They've got the pet tinctures and the CBD dog chews over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Do you have anxiety at all? Well, there's CBD gummies over there. Are you stressed after a long day? There's CBD bath bombs over there. They've got this new CBD massage oil. Carlos, one of the owners of Paloma Verde, keeps asking me if he can use it on me. I've not allowed him to do so yet, but I suspect that their CBD massage oil is quite amazing. So go check that out. All things CBD related, you will find at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. And since they support this show and they want to help the listeners of this show get a discount, I've got a promo code for you. It's BUCK, B-U-C-K. Just enter that at checkout. You will get 20% off of your order. That is BUCK, B-U-C-K, at checkout over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Tell them I sent you and enjoy the products. I know you will. Let's get back to the show. How did having a son come into this world change you?
It is it's changed me in really powerful ways that are really hard to describe. Because it's just before I became a father, I always heard other fathers who would talk about, you just can't describe it to someone who's not a dad. Like, you can't know it until you get it. And I was like, yeah, whatever, okay. So I know that people who aren't dads now they'll be having the same reaction that I used to have. So then you're kind of just preaching to the choir because you're preaching to other people who know what it is that you're talking about. But it's the idea of it's one thing to get married and to realize, okay, now I'm no longer one, I'm two. I have someone else who all of my decisions, they impact this other person. Everything that I do, I need to take this other person into consideration. And I'm part of a partnership for the rest of my life with all the most important decisions that I make. But then to have a third party enter that relationship who is wholly and entirely dependent upon you, to whom you are the entire world, and like they have no conception of the world apart from what you provide to them. It's a responsibility that is it's humbling, it's purifying, it's sobering, it's a burden that I would never trade for anything. I've been learning a lot through my encounters with orthodoxy. I've been learning a lot about suffering, and that Americans view suffering as a bad thing. Like, suffering is something to be avoided. Our entire economic system is built around the idea of people trying to avoid suffering. And the Orthodox are very different. They're not masochistic necessarily, but they don't shy away from suffering. They embrace it, and in some cases, they actually are concerned if they aren't experiencing any suffering, because in the Orthodox worldview, suffering is a tool that God uses to refine and purify and build you up. It is it's not a bad thing. It's literally, in every possible sense of the word, it's a good thing because it's making you into something better. So I won't say that being a father or having a son is all fun and all, hunky dory. It's a responsibility that you can never put down. And that is prior to, like, even getting married doesn't equate to that. It's something that just changes your entire world permanently. And a big thing about it is that I realized this within the first week or two of him being born. When like one day when he was a couple days old, we were looking at, he was kind of pink, and we took his temperature, and his temperature was high. He had it was like 100-degree fever. And we were just like, we were freaking out. Like, what do we do? We were like calling the doula, texting the midwife, like what's wrong? And if I remember right, it turned out that we just had him wrapped up too tight with a blanket, and we raised his core temperature a little bit, and we just unwrapped him and cooled him down, and he was fine. But at that point, the thought struck me that I will never for the rest of my life be able to turn off the part of my brain that worries about his well-being. That's now like a program that's going to run permanently in the back of my mind, no matter what. And I realized that this is going to sound kind of dark, but I don't mean it that way, that being a parent is signing up to make yourself vulnerable to experiencing the worst pain imaginable for the rest of your life. That's a vulnerability that will now no longer go away. I can't control that vulnerability. I can't do anything about it. The best I can do is I can protect him and do everything I can to protect him, to keep him safe, to build him up, to try to make him as capable as possible of defending himself and providing for himself. But I won't be able to control him forever. I can't even control him now. He's 18 months old. I can't even control him now. And so that means it's like, if you have the mindset that you have to control every potential avenue for suffering in your life, and you have to try to mitigate all those things, then you're going to be a bad parent. You're not going to be able to handle the responsibility and the role of being a parent, and it's not going to be a pleasant experience for you, because being a parent involves a lot of suffering. I don't like to just say that outright because it sounds bad. It sounds like I'm slighting him or something like that. And that's not the way it is. That's why I kind of did that whole build up to try to explain my thinking behind it. But yeah, so being a parent is a great pain and a great pleasure all at once, and like the best of both.
I think for people, this is a much lesser emotional grip on life. But if anyone who's into, they can almost say addicted to working out or CrossFit or these things, certainly you would agree that at some point you feel like, I feel like I'm suffering at this moment and this is not fun. But generally, broadly speaking, you think it makes you better. So I think it's in line with something like that, although I get the emotional detachment that you would have with working out versus having a kid. Was there ever a point in your life where you considered yourself an atheist?
No, I don't think so. I would say in retrospect, with the kind of the philosophical understanding that I have now, that the worldview that I held was necessarily atheistic. But I wouldn't have considered it so because I just didn't understand what I believed well enough. But I never really considered myself an atheist. I always kind of deep down, for most of my 20s, I was like outside the church. I had nothing to do with the church. I never stopped believing it was true. I just didn't know how to relate to it. I just didn't know what role to have it play in my life. I didn't know how to grapple with it. And I was just busy, just kind of going from thing to thing, and was kind of knew at some point I'd get back to it eventually. I would just get back to it at the right time, where I was doing it on my terms, I guess, rather than just kind of accepting whatever I'd been taught growing up. I was going to make it mine, and I didn't expect it to happen the way it did at all. And when it did, I kind of just found myself going down this road that I sort of realized I was pot committed and that I couldn't turn around. I just had to just kind of knuckle down and keep going. And it's funny. It's kind of a similar dynamic to my son, to Eastwood, and realizing like this is a very, very crass analogy, but it's kind of like a video game that you can never pause and save and come back to. Like you can't just let it go. It's there. All you have to keep playing it. You can't stop playing it ever. There's kind of a similar dynamic there with that. But yeah, no, I never considered myself an atheist explicitly. I went through a period of Eastern mysticism and kind of like, oh, we're all one, bro, and had that feeling of oneness and that everything is love. Those are kind of some of the thoughts that eventually led me into orthodoxy. And I wouldn't have ever gotten to orthodoxy if I hadn't first made that little jaunt through Eastern mysticism.
Because you grew up, I think you have told me, Seventh-day Adventist, yes?
Yep.
Okay, a lot of people, including myself, before you spoke with me about it, aren't familiar with that one. It's a little bit of a sect offshoot. What's the general kind of idea with Seventh-day Adventists?
So it's in the name. So seventh day, they believe that Saturday is the true biblical Sabbath and that it is like a salvational issue. The keeping of the Sabbath is a salvational issue that they believe from the fourth commandment, keep the Sabbath day and make it holy. And they see that. So from sundown Friday till sundown Saturday is considered the Sabbath. And you are, as a Seventh-day Adventist, you respect the Sabbath. There's things that you don't do. You don't purchase things to the best of your ability. You don't go shopping. You don't buy things. You don't go out to eat. You don't do labor. You don't. There's various levels of strictness throughout the denomination, and the most conservative Seventh-day Adventists are some of the most conservative people you'll ever meet. Like women don't wear pants. Women don't wear don't wear short sleeves. Men don't wear tank tops. No mixed swimming. Like that sort of thing.
Okay.
And so then for people like that, swimming on Sabbath is a no-no. But you can go wading on Sabbath, but not over your knees.
Okay.
So it's like it gets very legalistic. There's a big strain of vegetarianism that goes through that runs through it. It's related to what's called the health message, where there's a large chunk of Adventism that believes that that part of the role of the Adventist church as the true church is to bring a health message to the world so that people can help take care of their bodies, so their bodies become the temple of the Holy Spirit. And that leads to, so then the end times is the other part of the name, Adventist. So they look toward the advent of Christ. So they're like fairly apart from the thing with the Sabbath and their beliefs about the end times and the state of the dead. They're fairly ordinary Protestant, sort of similar in some senses to Baptist or to Methodist, kind of. They're just kind of like a generic Protestant church. They see themselves as just a normal Protestant denomination.
Okay.
They see themselves essentially as Methodists who worship on the biblical Sabbath. That's how they would describe it to to someone who's just asking. But their eschatology is very interesting. They have some interesting interpretations of prophecies in Daniel and Revelation, and they see the Antichrist in the Bible as being descriptive of the Pope. And so they consider the Pope to be the actual capital A Antichrist in the Bible. And they believe that the Sabbath is ultimately going to become a testing issue, and that the keeping of the Sabbath will be the mark of the true church. And so eventually, they talk about there becoming a point where there's a national Sunday law where it's mandated that you have to worship on Sunday. And like I can barely keep a straight face describing this now, but and so worshiping on the Sabbath is paramount. So it's a church that's very, very conservative, and it's liberalizing big time. So there's been big fractures in the church over the ordination of women, over issues of sexuality, over The types of music that's played in church. That was a big issue in my church growing up, was it split between people who wanted more modern, like praise and worship, and people who wanted to stick to the hymns and just the piano and no drums, that kind of thing. That's the kind of, that was my experience with Christianity. It was coming out of that kind of a culture. So the pivot to orthodoxy is not a natural one at all. There's very, very little that the two have in common with one another.
Why does orthodoxy speak to you, coming from something like that? I mean, that is quite different.
Because it's the truth. I didn't get into orthodoxy because because I felt like I was missing something religious in my life. I didn't think that I was going down a religious journey when I got into orthodoxy. I was pursuing history and philosophy and politics. Those are the things that led me to it. And like I said before, I was kind of getting a little bit into the Eastern mysticism, and I'd had some experiences with psychedelics and was very persuaded of the reality, the very, very realness of the spiritual world, the mystical world, whatever you want to call it, whether they're aliens, DMT elves, whatever it is. I was very compelled by that and wanted to know more. And I started studying like quantum mechanics and trying to understand that. And then at the same time, I was also unpacking the philosophical roots of liberalism. And so that led me into both history and philosophy. And I was kind of looking at all these sorts of things all at the same time. And it was really, I think that probably I got into Jay Dyer a little bit because of like conspiracy stuff, like the NEW, WORLD, ORDER stuff, and geopolitics, that kind of thing. And then found out that he had some Orthodox stuff. And then I started listening to Lord of Spirits. And that was a really big thing. I started listening to Lord of Spirits because I was going down the Graham Hancock path and was interested in the idea of giant humans and like past ancient civilizations and what happened with them. And that was actually really, that was, I think, where my toe first got dipped into it, because I was doing the Graham Hancock thing. I was looking at the history of Atlantis. I was looking at, cycles of catastrophe, all this kind of thing, and seeing the flood narrative everywhere. And it was kind of studying into that. And someone said, you should listen to this Lord of Spirits podcast. They talk about giants on there and like the history of giants, what the Nephilim are, that sort of thing. And I was like, oh, okay. So I started listening to it. There are a couple of Orthodox priests. And I was like, okay, well, I don't really know anything about that. And my perception of Orthodoxy was that it was like, they were like the Catholics who kind of dressed weird and just had like long beards and sort of looked like wizards. That was just sort of my perception of it. And I had like no concept for the early Christian period, the patristic fathers. Like, I had no idea that Christianity was a comprehensive ground up philosophy. That I was kind of like, well, if you want to study philosophy, you can do that, but that's like a secular thing. And then you have like your religion and theology. But no, like the church fathers of the first 1,000 years of the Christian church, these were like some of the most profound thinkers and influential philosophers. They're like at the very cutting edge of philosophy, on the very like foundations of epistemology and metaphysics and ontology. That's the history of Christianity. Christianity is a historical phenomenon. If you're part of the Christian church, you're the inheritors of a historical tradition, a real historical tradition of real events that is not, how would you say this? It's not something that is in addition to the rest of reality. It's the foundation of reality. No other explanation of reality explains reality as comprehensively as Christianity does. And that goes all the way to like the like if you study the Trinity and like what the Trinity is and what it means for the for creation, for the beginning of reality, for what being is, what personhood is. These are all things that are most modern philosophers can't even operate at this level. They don't even think at this level.
Right.
And realizing that being a Christian isn't just like kind of an assent to a bunch of beliefs that you take on faith, but it's an actual. It's a like Christianity isn't Gnosticism. It it's not something that just happens in your head. And this is a life that you're living just kind of for the sake of the next life. And the whole point is to get to heaven. Christianity is a, like, heaven starts now. Heaven and hell like begins now. This life is real. This life matters. And your material body, the physical material world, is just as important and just as real and just as good as the spiritual world, the spiritual realm, what you believe, your soul, all of those kinds of things. Modern Christianity is very, very Gnostic, and there's such a profound, deep earthiness to orthodoxy, which is funny because it's the thing that led me to being interested in it. Was people were like, well, they get into kind of mysticism. The mysticism you're interested in, there's a lot of mysticism in orthodoxy. So it's funny that I got into it pursuing mysticism and found the most grounded, real thing that I've ever encountered.
Mm-hmm. Well put. Look back at, we'll close up here, but I want you to look back at 2016 Matt Erickson and just tell him one thing.
Oh, man. One thing for 2016 Matt Erickson. I think I would tell him to start reading the Church Fathers.
Good advice.
I think that's what I would tell him, that the answers that you're looking for can be found in the Church Fathers. The Cappadocians. Right. Maybe I'll make it more specific. The Cappadocians.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not in a third party.
No, not in a third party. Abandoned ship.
Abandoned ship. And you did. All right. Plug away anything. I don't know what dates you got coming up as far as recording the show, or really, the floor is yours. Plug anything you'd like.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. That's where I'm kind of most active right now, at Real Kingpilled, RealKingpilled. You can subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. I've got another episode that's coming out here shortly, when I can buy myself an afternoon to sit down and kind of edit it up a little bit. I did a really interesting conversation with a mutual friend of ours, Josiah, and another friend of mine who's part of my private Discord server, Cooper. Two of the smartest guys that I've ever met, and two guys who are also on a journey into orthodoxy. And we had a really, really interesting conversation for about 2.5 hours. Last week, I think, is when I recorded it. And so I really need to get that edited and uploaded, but that'll get up here soon. And then we're going to start getting back into the swing of things here. I've got a list of people to interview, and I'm just trying to get myself settled in a stable weekly schedule. But we'll have some really interesting conversations through some of the interviews I've got planned. And then we'll get back to the live streams here, hopefully within the next month or so. So Kingpilled on YouTube, you can find it there. And then if you're interested, we have a supporting listeners group. If you want to talk about more stuff, especially related to orthodoxy or to global conspiracies or whatever else, we've got a fascinating group of some of the smartest guys that I've ever met on our Discord server, which you can join. You can just sign up for one of our Subscribestar tiers at subscribestar.com/Kingpilled. It'll get you automatically added to the server there. And we'll put it this way. We have a channel then there dedicated to theology, and we have a channel in there dedicated to the Anunnaki, is in the title. That's just
perfect.
Just because it made a good title. But those are the kinds of things we end up talking about there the most. So if that's something that's interesting to you, then subscribestar.com/Kingpilled. We'd love to have you there.
Awesome. I'll link to that here in the show notes page for this episode. Matt Erickson, my friend, fellow Texan, fellow St. Andrew catechumen. Good to chat with you.
You too, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. I hope you guys had a good time listening to that chat with my friend, Matt Erickson. And like we said, go check out the Kingpilled podcast. And you'll get to hear more of his thoughts, and hopefully he'll be doing those more often soon now that he's kind of settled here in Texas. As for this show, you know where to go, counterflowpodcast.com. Find our Telegram group on the Telegram app, Counterflow Podcast with Buck Johnson. And we got a lot of, you guys in that Telegram group are always posting excellent articles. I love it. I love the interaction with you guys. And follow me on Twitter at BuckRebel, BuckRebel. If you want to watch these interviews that I do, go to the YouTube page. Just go to YouTube, search Counterflow with Buck Johnson. Give us a follow on there. And until next week, you guys have a great one. See ya.
You get split in fucking half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.